My twin sister cheated on my best friend. My parents cut me off for 3 years for not abandoning him. Now they're back, asking $90K for her wedding. And my answer broke them. I'm 32 years old. I own a restaurant that's doing pretty well now. And honestly, I need to tell this story because what happened a few weeks ago still has me processing everything. Basically, my parents showed up after 3 years of not speaking to me to ask me for $90,000 for my twin sister's wedding. And when I say I laughed in their faces, I literally laughed in their faces. But wait, let me backtrack because this story starts way before that and it's a lot more complicated than it sounds. Sophie and I are twins. She was born 16 minutes after me. Something my parents, Thomas and Patricia, always mentioned, as if those 16 minutes were an eternity or something. We grew up in a normal house, nothing special. My dad worked in real estate until he retired a few years ago, and my mom is a history professor at the university. For as long as I can remember, Sophie was always the golden child, and I'm not saying this with resentment like a jealous brother. I mean, not at first, but over time it became super obvious to anyone who knew us. If Sophie wanted something, she got it. If I wanted the same thing, I had to work twice as hard or simply didn't get it. She could get mediocre grades and my parents would say, "Oh, poor thing, she's doing her best." But I'd get a 95 instead of 100, and it was, "Why didn't you try harder, Daniel?" You know what I mean? It was that kind of constant dynamic throughout our entire childhood and adolescence. I met Michael in college. We were roommates freshman year and became really good friends almost immediately. The guy was genuinely a good person, one of those who helps you move without having to ask twice, who lends you money without expecting you to pay it back right away. You know, the kind of friend everyone wants to have. We were both studying business administration, shared a lot of classes, spent time together constantly. When Sophie came to visit me on campus, she met Michael, and honestly, I thought they made a good couple. He was all stability and reliability. She was more spontaneous and social. They seemed to complement each other well. I introduced them formally at one of those friend gatherings we did on Fridays, and they started dating shortly after. I never thought that decision, introducing them, would end up basically destroying my relationship with my entire family. But well, that's how things go, I guess. Sophie and Michael dated for 6 years before getting married. 6 years, I mean, it wasn't a rushed relationship or anything like that. Michael treated her incredibly. Really, better than I had seen any other boyfriend treat her before. My parents adored him too. Thomas always said Michael was like the son he never had, which was kind of offensive to me, but, well, I was already used to those kinds of comments. Patricia invited Michael to all family dinners, included him in everything. He was practically part of the family. The wedding was nice. Nothing. Extravagant but well done. In a nice garden with like 150 guests. Michael and I went together to try on suits and all that best man stuff. I remember that day thinking, well, at least my sister found someone who really loves her and will take care of her, that optimistic thought you have when you see people you love get married. The first 3 years of marriage seemed to go well, or at least from the outside. Sophie worked in marketing for a medium-sized company. Michael had gotten a really good job at a consulting firm. They bought a house together, adopted a dog, all that young couple life settling down. I had opened my restaurant by then. Something small at first, an Asian fusion food place in a neighborhood that was starting to get trendy. Michael helped me with all the legal paperwork and permits, spent months helping me for free because we were best friends, and that's how we are. We help each other. Sophie came occasionally to eat, but there was always that air of, I don't know, like superiority type. "Oh, how cute your little restaurant, Daniel," as if it were a kid's hobby and not my real business. My parents were similar. They came once in a while but never really showed much pride in what I was building. Not like when Sophie got any small promotion at her work. That was reason for a complete family celebration. Everything went to hell about 4 years ago. 4.5 years, maybe. Michael called me on a Tuesday night. It must have been 11 or something, and he was destroyed, like crying on the phone, something I had never heard him do. He told me he had found messages on Sophie's phone, messages with a coworker, and they weren't exactly friend messages. They were explicit messages, you know what I mean? Photos, plans to meet up, all the evidence of an affair that had apparently been going on for months. I couldn't believe it. Honestly, my first reaction was like, "Are you sure? Isn't there some misunderstanding?" But no, there was no possible misunderstanding. Michael sent me some of the messages and it was clear as day. Sophie had been cheating on him with this guy from her office for at least 6 months, maybe more. Michael confronted Sophie that same night, and she basically admitted everything, but with zero remorse, according to what he told me later. She told him she felt bored, that she needed some excitement in her life, that he worked too much and didn't pay her enough attention. All that classic rhetoric of someone who's justifying something unjustifiable. Michael was devastated, completely broken. The guy really loved her and had imagined a whole life together. The next day, he went to a lawyer and started divorce proceedings. There was no couples therapy or reconciliation attempts or anything. It was just, "This is over. I can't be with someone who betrayed me like this." And honestly, I completely understood him. I would have done the same in his position. Sophie called me like 2 days after the discovery, and she was furious, not at me specifically, but at the situation. She told me Michael was overreacting, that it had been a mistake, that everyone makes mistakes, and she expected me, as her twin brother, to support her unconditionally. I told her what she had done was wrong, that Michael was my best friend, in addition to being her husband, and that I couldn't just tell him, "Oh yeah, Sophie, it's fine that you cheated on him. Let's continue as if nothing happened." She didn't like that at all. She started yelling at me on the phone, saying that blood is more important than friendship, that I should be on her side no matter what, that I was her brother and that's it. I told her that being siblings didn't mean I had to approve every horrible decision she made, and I hung up. The following months were super tense. The divorce was moving forward. Michael was temporarily living in my apartment because he didn't want to be in the house they had shared, and I supported him in everything I could. I listened to him vent. We went out for drinks when he needed to distract himself. I accompanied him to some of the meetings with the lawyer. He was my best friend, and he was going through the worst moment of his life. What else was I going to do? Meanwhile, Sophie had started publicly dating the guy she had the affair with. She didn't even have the decency to wait for the divorce to be finalized, which obviously made the whole process even more painful for Michael. My parents knew everything that was happening, but their reaction was, "Well, these things happen in marriages. Sophie has the right to be happy. Michael is an adult, and he'll get over it." There wasn't a moment where they told Sophie, "Hey, what you did was wrong." None of that. About 6 months after the discovery of the infidelity, Sophie called me and gave me an ultimatum. She told me, "Either you stop talking to Michael or you stop talking to me. You can't be friends with my ex-husband and my brother at the same time. You have to choose." I looked at her, because we were in a coffee shop when she had this conversation, and I told her, "Are you kidding? Michael didn't do anything wrong to you. You were the one who ruined the marriage. Why would I have to abandon my best friend because you made horrible decisions?" She got hysterical, started crying in the middle of the coffee shop, saying that I had never really loved her, that I had always preferred my friends over her. All that dramatic speech. I maintained my position, told her I wasn't going to stop being friends with Michael, and that if that meant she didn't want to talk to me, well, that was her decision, not mine. I thought that would be the end of it. You know, Sophie and I just wouldn't talk for a while until she matured and realized she was being ridiculous. But no, she went straight to Thomas and Patricia and told them her version of the story. A version where apparently I had abandoned her in her time of need, where I was choosing a stranger over my own blood, where basically I was the terrible brother. My parents called me a week later and told me we needed to have a family meeting to discuss the situation. I went. Because at that moment, I still had some hope that my parents would see reason and understand my position. The family meeting was at my parents' house on a Sunday afternoon. Sophie was there with her new partner, the guy she had the affair with, which right off the bat seemed in super bad taste to me, but whatever. Thomas started with a prepared speech about the importance of family, about how friendships come and go, but family is forever, about how I needed to support Sophie because she was my sister and she needed me. Patricia was crying before Thomas finished speaking. She's one of those people who cries about everything, super emotional and emotionally fragile speaking. I waited for them to finish and explained the whole situation from my perspective. Told them that Michael had been my friend since college, that Sophie was the one who destroyed her marriage with her infidelity, that I couldn't just abandon someone who had been there for me for over 10 years just because Sophie decided it was inconvenient for her. Sophie started screaming that I was distorting the story, that her relationship with Michael was already broken before she met the other guy, which was completely false, but my parents seemed to believe her more than me. Thomas looked at me and said, "Daniel, we understand that Michael is your friend, but Sophie is your sister, your twin. You were born together and you'll die together. You can't allow a friendship to destroy that connection." I told him that nobody was destroying anything, that I could be Sophie's brother and Michael's friend simultaneously, that I didn't have to choose one or the other. Patricia spoke through tears, saying this was destroying her, that she couldn't stand seeing her children fighting, that I had to be the more mature one and take the first step, that I had to show Sophie that family was more important. Things escalated quickly. Sophie gave our parents an ultimatum, basically told them, "Either you make Daniel stop talking to Michael, or I'll cut you off too. I'm not going to have my brother being best friends with my ex-husband. It's humiliating and painful for me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I mean, she had been the cheater. She had destroyed a 6-year marriage with a genuinely good person, and now she was trying to manipulate the whole family so that I would look like the bad guy. I told Sophie she was acting like a manipulative and selfish child, that the world didn't revolve around her, and that if she wanted to cut me off because I wasn't doing what she wanted, then go ahead. But Michael was still my friend. I got up to leave, and Thomas told me, "If you walk out that door and don't change your mind, you're going to lose your family. Is that what you want?" I told him, "You're the ones who are choosing, not me," and I left. My parents called me 2 days later and told me they had made a decision. They chose Sophie. They told me that until I stopped being friends with Michael and apologized to Sophie for not supporting her in her difficult time, they couldn't have a relationship with me. Patricia was crying on speakerphone, saying this broke her heart, but she had no choice, that she had to protect her daughter, that she hoped someday I would understand. I hung up the phone, and honestly, I was in shock for a good while. I couldn't process that my parents were really cutting me off, that they were really choosing Sophie's side after everything that had happened. Michael was there when I received the call and told me that if I wanted to reconcile with my family, he would understand. That he didn't want to be the reason I lost my parents and sister. But I told him no, that this wasn't his fault, that it was Sophie's fault, and my parents for allowing her manipulative behavior. 3 years passed, without talking to them. 3 full years. There were no calls, no messages, no birthday or Christmas wishes or anything. It was as if I had died to them. The first months were difficult. I'm not going to lie. I had moments where I thought, did I do the right thing? Should I have just given in to keep family peace? But then I remembered how Sophie had destroyed Michael, how my parents had validated her horrible behavior, and I knew I had made the right decision. Michael continued being my best friend during all that time. He ended up rebuilding his life, dated some people, gradually healed from the trauma of the divorce. We supported each other, celebrated birthdays together, spent Christmases together when he didn't have other plans with his family. He basically became my chosen family since my biological family had abandoned me. My restaurant really started to take off during the 2nd year of not talking to my family. A pretty popular food blogger in the city came to eat without me knowing who he was, loved everything, and wrote a super positive review that basically made the place explode in popularity. Suddenly, we had waiting lists every night. I had to hire more staff, expanded the menu. Reservations were being made weeks in advance. Financially, I was doing very well, much better than I had ever done before. It was ironic, you know. My family had cut me off, and right at that moment, my life started to improve significantly. Part of me wanted to rub the restaurant's success in their faces, but I had no way to do it because we weren't talking. So I just kept building my business and my life without them. About a month ago, a month and a half maybe, I received a call from a number I still had saved as Dad in my phone. I almost didn't answer. Honestly, I saw the name on the screen and my first instinct was to reject the call, but something made me answer. It was Thomas, and his tone was weird, like artificially friendly, type when someone is talking nice to you, because they want something from you. He asked me how I was, how the restaurant was going. commented that he had seen some reviews online and that it seemed I was doing very well. I responded with only short answers. Yes, fine, thanks, without giving him much information. After a few minutes of awkward chat, he told me that he and Patricia wanted to come visit me at the restaurant, that they felt enough time had passed, and they wanted to reconnect. I told them they could come, and we arranged it for a Tuesday afternoon, when the restaurant is normally quieter. They showed up on time, sat at a table I prepared for them in a private corner, and the first 10 minutes were super tense. Patricia was crying before we even really started talking, saying she had missed me so much that it had been very difficult these 3 years without me. All that emotional speech. Thomas was more contained, but you could tell he was also uncomfortable. We ordered food, they ate, said everything was delicious. Patricia mentioned like 5 times how proud she was of the restaurant's success. I kept waiting for them to get to the real point of the visit because I knew they hadn't come just to reconnect. There had to be something more. After finishing eating, Thomas finally got to the point. He told me Sophie was getting married again, to the guy she had the affair with 4 years ago, and that they were planning a big wedding, like 300 guests, at a super fancy venue. He told me the total wedding budget was like $150,000, an absurd amount, frankly, and that the groom's father had offered to pay part but not all. That's where I came in, apparently. Thomas and Patricia wanted me to contribute $90,000 for Sophie's wedding. $90,000. For my sister's second wedding to the guy she cheated on her first husband with. I thought he was joking. I literally thought it was a joke, but his face was completely serious. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. I laughed in their faces. I told them, "Are you serious? You cut me off for 3 years, didn't talk to me for 3 birthdays and 3 Christmases, treated me as if I was dead, and now you show up asking me for $90,000 for a wedding?" Thomas got defensive, saying they weren't asking me for $90,000, that they were asking my successful business to contribute to my sister's happiness, as if that were different. Patricia started crying harder, saying Sophie was my sister, that this was important to her, that family means everything, all that emotionally manipulative garbage she had always used. I told them very clearly, "I'm not going to give you a single cent for that wedding. Sophie means nothing to me at this point. Neither do you. You abandoned me when I needed you most, and now you show up only because you want money." Thomas got angry and started telling me I was selfish, that I had always been selfish and resentful of Sophie, that the restaurant would be nothing without all the lessons he had taught me about business when I was a kid. Pure, ridiculous excuses, trying to justify why I owed him something. I told him something I had been keeping to myself for years. I told him, "You know what, Dad? You have 2 children, and neither of them really matters to you. Sophie only looks for you when she wants something. I literally would have supported you in anything, but you chose her side without even considering my perspective. And now that your golden daughter needs money you don't have, you come to me. It's pathetic, honestly." Patricia got up from the table saying, I had no right to talk to them like that they were my parents and deserved respect. I told them that respect is earned, and they had lost mine 3 years ago when they chose a manipulative daughter over a son who was just being loyal to a friend who had been treated horribly. They left the restaurant furious. Thomas yelling something about how I would never do it. Regret this someday. I didn't regret it. A week later, Thomas called me again. This time his tone was completely different. It was no longer friendly or even formal. He was angry from the beginning. He told me Patricia was emotionally destroyed, that she had been crying every day since our conversation, that she couldn't eat or sleep well, and that it was my responsibility as a son to fix this. He demanded that I go see her, that I apologize, that I reconsider my position on the wedding money. I told him I had no intention of doing any of that if they wanted apologies, they should start by apologizing to me for 3 years of abandonment. Thomas told me that if I didn't go see Patricia in the next few days, he himself would come to the restaurant to force me. I told him very clearly that if he or any member of my family showed up at my property to harass me, I would call the police. I wasn't joking, and I hung up. During the following weeks, there were attempts by various family members to convince me to help with the wedding. A cousin wrote me saying I was being immature. An uncle called me suggesting that family disagreements shouldn't involve money. All these people who hadn't talked to me for 3 years suddenly had opinions about what I should do with my money. I told them all the same thing. This isn't a normal family disagreement. They completely abandoned me for 3 years, and now they want me to act as if nothing happened because they need money. It doesn't work like that. Most stopped insisting after the first conversation. Some were more persistent, but eventually also gave up. Then something interesting happened that I didn't see coming. Turns out Sophie had also been fighting with another cousin of ours, Rachel, who is currently pregnant. Rachel announced her pregnancy at a family gathering like 2 months ago, and Sophie apparently got super angry, saying Rachel was trying to steal her wedding spotlight, that it was selfish to announce a pregnancy when she was planning to get married. All that kind of narcissistic thinking. Rachel told her the world didn't revolve around her, and that a pregnancy isn't planned around other people's weddings. Sophie demanded that she not talk about the pregnancy at any family gathering until after the wedding, so as not to distract attention. Rachel obviously told her she was crazy and ended up cutting her off completely, also cut off Thomas and Patricia for not defending her from Sophie's ridiculous attacks. This created an interesting division in the extended family. Several cousins and uncles who had been quiet during all the drama now started to vocalize against Sophie, Thomas, and Patricia. They realized the pattern of toxic behavior, how Sophie always made everything about herself, how my parents had always allowed and validated her horrible behavior. They started talking to each other, and to me. Some contacted me to apologize for not having supported me before, others to ask me my version of the whole story, because they had only heard Sophie's version. Basically, Thomas and Patricia and Sophie were becoming increasingly isolated, while the rest of the family realized the reality of the situation. Thomas and Patricia made a Facebook post, or Patricia did it, probably because Thomas isn't very into social media, where they basically blamed Daniel, that's me, for destroying the family, for having turned family members against them with lies and manipulation, for being a resentful son who had never gotten over not being the favorite. The post was long, dramatic, full of phrases about how they had tried to be good parents, but some children are just ungrateful no matter what you do. What they didn't expect was the reaction. Dozens of comments from family members defending me, telling their own experiences of how Sophie had been horrible to them in the past, how Thomas and Patricia had always excused her behavior. The post ended up being deleted after a day, but the damage was already done. It became super clear to everyone who was really the problem in this situation. The final blow came when Thomas and Patricia had to tell Sophie they couldn't give her the $90,000 she was expecting for the wedding. I don't know exactly what conversation they had, but I know Sophie exploded completely. She told them they were useless. What kind of parents can't pay for their daughter's wedding? That she had counted on that money and now would have to have a mediocre wedding because of them. She blamed them for having fought with me, saying that if they had handled the situation with me better, from the beginning, I would have contributed the money. Thomas called me after that fight, not to ask me for money again, but like to vent, and told me Sophie had told them she didn't want them to come to the wedding if they couldn't contribute financially. She practically uninvited them from her own wedding. Sophie ended up cutting off contact with Thomas and Patricia completely, just like she had done with me 3 years ago. The difference is that with me, it was because I didn't abandon a friend. With them, it was because they didn't have enough money to give her the princess wedding she wanted. My parents were devastated. Thomas called me crying, something I had never heard him do, saying he didn't understand how both his children had abandoned them, what they had done wrong as parents. Part of me wanted to tell him, "Do you really not see it? Don't you see how you created this monster by allowing and validating every selfish behavior of Sophie's for 32 years? But I didn't say it. I just listened because despite everything, they were still my parents, and hearing them suffer didn't make me feel as good as I thought it would. Sophie's wedding ended up happening like 2 weeks ago. It was a much smaller version of what she had originally planned, like 100 guests instead of 300, in a more modest place because the groom's father wasn't willing to pay the ridiculous amount the original venue cost. Thomas and Patricia weren't invited. Sophie maintained her decision of not wanting them there. Several cousins told me afterwards that the wedding was fine, but that Sophie looked miserable during the whole event, as if it wasn't really what she wanted. The groom paid most of the expenses with help from his family. Sophie had to settle for a celebration she probably considered below her expectations. My parents have contacted me a couple of times since then. Short conversations where they basically admit they maybe made mistakes and how they handled everything. Thomas told me a few days ago he finally understands my position from 3 years ago, that now that he's on the other side of being cut off by Sophie, he can see how it feels. Patricia is still super emotional about everything, cries every time we talk on the phone, but at least she's no longer demanding I do ridiculous things. I don't know if, and we're going to rebuild a real relationship. Honestly, I'm not sure I want to after everything that happened, but at least there's no longer active hostility. Michael is still my best friend, obviously. He completely rebuilt his life. He's dating someone new now, a genuinely good person who treats him incredibly. Sometimes he jokes saying he owes me everything, because if I hadn't been there for him during the divorce, he doesn't know what he would have done. But I tell him friends support each other. That's how real friendships work. My restaurant continues doing super well. I'm considering opening a second location next year. Things professionally are better than ever. Personally, well, I lost my family, but I also realized that family wasn't so healthy to begin with. So, I don't know if I really lost something valuable, or if I just freed myself from a toxic dynamic that had lasted my entire life. What impacts me most about all this is how things ended up basically proving I was right all along. Sophie showed her true nature not just with me, but with our parents too, and eventually even with other family members. Thomas and Patricia finally experienced firsthand what it means to be on the receiving end of Sophie's selfishness. The extended family saw the whole pattern of toxic behavior and made decisions about who they wanted to maintain relationships with. And me, the son who was cut off for being loyal to a friend, ended up in a better position than any of them. With a successful business, solid friendships, and without the burden of having to constantly validate other people's horrible behavior just because we share blood. I don't know if that counts as a happy ending, but it's the ending I have and one I can live with.